these books, these are 3 different translations of the I Ching. They come in all flavors. Unless you speak Chinese, you don't want the original manuscript. And they're it's a 5,000-year-old tradition which the Confucian scholars have added commentaries to. So this is an ongoing, evolving document. And I've even made some tapes that are an introduction to the I Ching, which I'll tell you about when I get a minute. And that's just part of that same 5,000-year tradition in which the thinking of the dialogue and the adding layers continues on. So it's not just something that was a good idea thousands of years ago. This has been in continuous use throughout the East for those thousands. Millions of people have been using it most of the time of most of that 5,000 years. So this is an extraordinary tool that has very wide beta testing, let's call it. This tool has been tested like very few things I know of. And being a scientific skeptic, I was introduced to this by another fellow PhD who's a doctor of linguistics, and he said, "This is the most extraordinary book I know of, and I'll introduce it to you." And we started in complete skepticism. And every answer we would do, we would try to apply to another question to see if it was so generic of, you should center yourself and eat more granola. Is it generic advice so that every answer fits any question? No, it's not. If we ask 3 questions and the answers feel pretty good, what happens if we switch the questions and match them with different answers? So does that work? No, you can feel, that's not working. Okay. When they give you, can you deduce information and then track it and see if it tends to come true? Yes, you can. Okay. Can they effectively predict elements of the future? Oh gosh, they seem to be doing that in a disturbing fashion. So we started with a completely skeptical, scientific approach to it, testing and refusing to take anything for granted. And what I did accidentally, after a couple of years of serious scrutinizing and testing, was I accidentally convinced myself, geez, this thing works. And while I'm scientifically testing it, I'm getting a heck of a lot of data points for it. And when you start having dilemmas in your own life, you say, well, over there in that testing, when I'm being a skeptic over there in the afternoon, it's now evening time and I've got a personal decision to make, and I think I'd like some guidance, I'd like some help. And so I started using it for my own personal as well as the testing process. I remember when Barbara called back there when she was a fellow doctoral student at University of Michigan, and we were about at the dissertation stage. She said, I've got a wonderful job. There's some research money coming down through the juvenile justice system, and you work with the police department, and it's research, and it pays $20 an hour, and it'll get you through your doctoral program. It's a wonderful deal, and you're one of the better researchers I know. You want a job? And I said, whoa, boy, I sure do. Let me think about it. I'll call you in the morning. Meaning, I'm going to ask the I Ching because I've been doing this thing now 5 times a day for months, and we haven't been able to trick it yet, and so I'd like their help. And so I asked, and the I Ching said, terrible idea, specified a whole list of reasons why one should not do it. This outcome and that outcome, and every manner of difficulty that was going to result from that process. Boy, that was a tough one, because we really needed the money at that time to get through grad school. And I wrestled with that all night, and I said, you know, they haven't made a mistake yet. I can't afford to bet against the scientific evidence I've been gathering myself in order to disprove it, but working the other way. I didn't take the job and grumbled just a little bit, but regularly, off and on, for months. And until I got the call from Barbara, and she said, I said, how you doing? And she said, terrible. And I said, what's happening? And she said, this thing is a fiasco. We are in a swamp with this thing, and there's trouble with the government, and they're not paying off on the stuff, so we don't have the flow, so they don't have the funds to pay us, and they don't like the research we're doing because we're not coming up with the results they wanted, and the police department is mad as hell, and we're caught in the middle, and there's nothing we can do but press on because we're committed and our reputations are on it, and I'm going to have to drop out of the doctoral program in order to finish up this project. Oh. So I felt terrible for her, and she said, boy, she said, I'm sorry for everybody I offered this job to, because everybody who took it is in the same soup right with me. And she said, you really got lucky. And I thought about it, and I said, you know, I didn't get lucky. It wasn't a matter of luck. As a matter of fact, I was forewarned. And We then had a talk about it, and she now uses the I Ching all the time. But having learned it the hard way, and I learned a lot of my lessons the hard way, but there's no need to learn any more than you have to that way. And there are so many in that category now that I know have been spared because I've been able to track and see the outcomes and see what happened with some of the predictions that were made. So you don't have to learn everything the hard way. So okay, that's our basic orientation to the I Ching and what it's up to. Anybody have any questions at this point that you want to ask before I launch into a different phase? Yeah.
You referred to the I Ching that's I asked them, they said this. Would you explain the they that you're referring to? I understand it's the higher self, but how you're using that term.
Yes, how am I using that term, they?
This is the spiritist center.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm using the term loosely and sloppily, I would say. And yet not exactly. In one sense, I mean they by the different translations, because I rely on three basic, a triad of three different translations. And so in a sense, the they refers to the three people who wrote those versions, those versions of the I Ching. So in some sense, it's they who are telling me. In another sense, it's the generic they, it's whoever I'm talking to in a very pragmatic kind of way. And it's nobody knows exactly who it is, why the I Ching works, or who exactly we're talking to. I'm assuming that it's my own higher self who I'm talking to, and here's what they said to me. There are also specific immortals who are invisible beings, who are the protectors of the I Ching. There are ancients, and there's a hall of honors, and there are references in the book to the ancients and the invisibles who take care of that. When I've talked with beings who see our guides and helpers in the other world, one of the people that's been told to me several times is that I have a very ancient I Ching advisor or guide who works with me from the other side. So I may be referring to this guide indirectly part of the time. But ideally, it's called the sage. They say, well, when you're talking to the I Ching, you're consulting with the sage. And that's all a matter of languaging. Some people would call that the higher self, or the invisible guides who help us, or the I Ching scholars who are devoted to bringing clarity to humans. It could be any of those that would, that you would actually be referring to. Good question, though. Thank you. Yes?
I got a little confused on your story about when you kept asking if you should take that office.
Mm-hmm.
You kept saying yes, 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 yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason later it said no is because you specified to them that you didn't want that?
No.
The reason I want to know is because if I ever start to do this, I don't want to take advice.
Yeah.
That I don't want to make the same mistake you did.
Yeah.
So.
This was an advanced discussion after 15 years of working with them, and where they know my mind extremely well. And what was the nutshell was I didn't really want to find an office at all. I didn't want to go back and practice, and I was supposed to, but I was resisting it tremendously at that time. And the advice was to take a clearly, absolutely wrong office, which they knew in my heart, I knew immediately was so wrong I could never have taken it. And yet they have never guided me wrong, and so they put me into a crisis intentionally. And it took about 3 days of working through that, from a Friday evening to a Monday morning, to work through that crisis until I angrily specified, all right, when I get an office in Boulder, here's what I want. It's going to have, and I had the whole list of everything that was going to be there and everything that was not going to be there. And what they said at that point was, oh, that sounds just great. Why don't you go get that?
They were trying to help you clarify what you
They
wanted.
forced me to commit to getting what I needed to do and to clarify exactly what I wanted.
It, knowing that you didn't want to take it.
This is reverse psychology, works on children and doctors. Big, yeah. Yes?
What question did you ask that saved your life when it talked about the pit?
I really was just, what do I need to know about returning to civilization, with quotes around civilization?
Okay, so why didn't you, but where you were wasn't the pit. I mean, why did you get on the road? Why did you decide to get on?
They didn't tell me not to go, they just told me what I needed to be aware of in order to do that, in order to make that transition. And you don't know where these things are going to show up, but you're now forewarned. My shaman teacher, Harvey, used to do the same thing, and he would simply weave it into alleged stories about things that happened in the war. And after you knew him enough years, you'd say, why is he always telling war stories? And you realize if you want higher consciousness, if you wish to listen to your soul instead of your ego, you will be engaged in a war for a goodly period of time. So all these war stories were in fact metaphors about what was happening in our own lives and psyches and what was going to happen. He would always give us the prediction for the next week's work, would be woven in some ancient story. That's where I first learned, in fact, that you absolutely can predict the future, much as I thought it was impossible. I remember Harvey telling a story about his friend who had bought 4 new tires right after the war. Oh, rubber was dear back then, he said, and he'd bought these 4 tires and was complaining like a banshee about all the cost of it and whatnot. And finally, he said, the 3rd day after he had those new tires, we walked out one morning and the right rear tire was just flat as could be. And he was mad as could be. He was kicking it and swearing up a storm. He said, had a heck of a mouth on him for a deacon of the church. I had no idea what he's talking about. And I used to spend all week trying to decode his metaphors. And I'm doing dream work and the rest of the time and decoding his stories in my spare time. And I'm driving along, I'm right down on 15th Street, down by the post office. And I was driving along in that same little Toyota Starlet and saying, boy, you know, I just bought 4 new tires, now that I think of it. Funny that didn't occur to me for the last couple of days. And, well, you know, actually I was kind of complaining about how much they cost me. They were pretty expensive. Rubber is pretty dear even now. That's strange. Now, when was that? I got them, so this would be the 3rd day. No. And I pulled in right by the telephone company, just across from the post office. I remember jumping out and running around and looked at the right rear tire, not that much air left in the right rear, not that much. And I could hear him laughing. And the thought I heard was, you don't have to believe it's possible, but you will have to change your own darn tires.